The wind rolled across the open plains of the western frontier as the winter sun dragged itself down the sky like a tired horse after a long ride. The ranch sat alone between red rock hills and wide grassland, where coyotes called at dusk, and the creak of the barn door was sometimes the only voice for hours. The rancher, a quiet man who worked hard but rarely smiled, stood outside his wooden cabin with one hand on the railing and the other trying to settle his heartbeat. He had spent years fighting loneliness on his land, watching other men build families while he came home to silent suppers and empty chairs. Tonight, he waited for something different, something he had prayed for during long nights when only the stars knew his thoughts. His mail-order bride was supposed to arrive by wagon before dark, and for the first time in a long while, he felt hope instead of cold emptiness. The cabin porch had been swept clean, his best shirt pressed, and a small table inside was already set with warm cornbread, coffee, and a stew that had been simmering since noon. He rehearsed what he might say when she stepped down from the wagon. He feared he would sound foolish or stiff, but he wanted her to know she would be respected, cared for, and treated kindly. Many women who agreed to such arrangements came from hard lives, broken homes, or desperate towns. He wanted her to feel safe on this land. No shouting, no unkind hands, no chains of fear. Just two people trying to build a future on dusty soil and wide sky. As the evening light turned orange, he looked down the long dirt trail between cottonwood trees. Each second felt like a slow drip from a leaky roof on a cold night. He pictured her as he had seen in the small photograph folded in his pocket. A soft expression, humble clothing, eyes that looked unsure, yet hopeful. He wondered if she feared the unknown as much as he did. She prayed that he would not turn out cruel or rough like the stories told by traveling merchants. He practiced a warm greeting in his mind, one that sounded gentle and real. By the time the sky shifted to deep blue, he could no longer keep still. He walked down to the edge of his land and listened for wheels over dirt. The sound came at last, faint but real, like distant thunder crawling over dry ground. The wagon lantern swayed in the dark, making shadows jump and stretch across the trees. His throat tightened with a strange mixture of joy and fear, the kind a man could hardly admit out loud. He fixed his posture, brushed his boots on a rock, and tried to look calm, though his heart raced faster than a wild Mustang at a rodeo. The horses slowed and the driver pulled back on the reins. The rancher stepped forward, bracing himself for the moment his life might change. He expected to see a small figure, possibly shy and uncertain, step down from the wagon with a suitcase tied in old rope. But instead, the driver looked uneasy, as if unsure whether to speak or disappear. The rancher frowned, looking into the back of the wagon, and his breath hitched when he saw a massive silhouette blocking the lantern light. Someone taller than any man he had ever seen filled the space, shoulders almost touching both sides. When that figure stepped down, the ground itself seemed to notice. The man towered over the rancher with a strong, solid build carved by outdoor life, survival, and tradition. His dark hair fell behind his shoulders, braided with natural elements, and his skin carried the sun-baked tone of long journeys across wild land. His chest rose calmly with each breath, not threatened nor afraid, only watchful and certain. The rancher realized this person was Apache, not a lost traveler or hired guard, but someone with purpose. Nothing about him looked confused or accidental. He stood in silence, studying the rancher with eyes that held more history than a shelf of leather-bound books. For a moment, no one spoke. The cold air sat between them like a thick wall. The rancher managed to say he expected a woman, his voice almost cracking. The driver only muttered that he was hired for transport and could not answer more. Without another word, he flicked the reins and hurried away, leaving dust to rise like smoke behind him. The rancher stood alone with the towering Apache man, unsure if he should reach for his hat brim or take a step back. He had invited a bride, not a stranger capable of knocking a man off his feet with one hand. Yet something in the Apache man's calm and quiet presence kept him from reacting out of fear. The Apache visitor carried a thick bundle wrapped in leather, tied carefully with decorated rope. He placed it on the ground before speaking. His voice was deep but steady, like the slow roll of river water in spring. He spoke few words, each placed with intention, saying he came with agreement, papers signed, marked, and traded. The rancher almost choked at the sound of that. Agreement papers for what? The bride? A trade he did not understand. He felt his chest tighten. The Apache man, though calm, stood like someone who would defend what he believed was right. Not with wild rage, but with unshakable certainty. The rancher invited him toward the porch. To avoid standing in the freezing wind, his mind ran like wild cattle breaking through a corral gate. Why would a giant Apache warrior come instead of a bride? Was she harmed? Did she change her mind? Was she taken away? Sold, hidden, protected? Did this man come to return a message, or did he claim her place by some tribal or family rule? The rancher poured warm coffee with shaking hands, and for a brief moment their eyes met. The warrior's eyes did not hold hostility, yet they held a silence that carried weight heavier than iron. He noticed details now he missed earlier. The man's clothes had traveled dust, but were in good condition. Decorated with crafted beads, signifying meaning rather than fashion, his belt carried handcrafted tools, not weapons raised for trouble. His presence spoke of strength, discipline, and purpose. He was not lost, not abandoned, not a runaway, and not someone who followed orders without thought. The rancher wondered if this man came to challenge him, protect someone, or fulfill a promise that crossed cultural lines. Inside the cabin, the warm smell of stew filled the room. The Apache visitor's eyes paused on the table, setting arranged for 2, not 3 or 4. The rancher felt embarrassed, almost foolish. The tension grew thicker when the Apache man unwrapped the leather bundle, revealing something that made the rancher step forward in shock. It was not a weapon, not stolen goods, and not something dangerous. Yet it held a meaning powerful enough to change everything the rancher believed he understood about this night. The Apache man slowly lifted his gaze and said a sentence that turned the rancher's heartbeat into thunder inside his chest, leaving him unsure if his life was about to crumble or transform into something he never planned. Everything he waited for was now hanging in a thin line between fear and truth, and he could not decide whether to run, fight, or listen before making the biggest choice of his life. The rancher stood frozen, feeling the weight of the unknown pull harder than the cold wind outside. He waited for the Apache man to explain, but the silence stretched, filling the room thicker than smoke. The leather bundle remained open on the table between them. The contents inside carried a meaning that he could not yet understand. The Apache man ran his hand gently over the carved marks on the object, as if he was touching memory instead of material. The rancher swallowed hard and asked what it meant, though his voice barely escaped his throat. The Apache man answered slowly, choosing each word with care, saying he traveled across long land, snow, and hunger to bring it here because it was part of an agreement he could not break. The rancher felt a shiver that had nothing to do with winter. He wanted to ask why the bride was not there, but the question stayed trapped behind his teeth. The Apache man finally spoke again, saying the woman whose picture the rancher carried could not come. Not because she changed her heart or was taken away by misfortune, but because fate had laid a different path at her feet. The rancher sat down, feeling the wood creak under his weight. His thoughts jumped through every possibility, good and bad, but none made sense without the missing pieces. He looked at his guest, noticing that despite his size, he did not force his presence. He moved with respect, as one raised to honor both land and spirit. The rancher asked why he was the one sent in her place. The Apache man answered that his arrival was part of something larger than either of them, something rooted in 2 worlds that rarely understood one another. He explained that long ago, long before the rancher even placed his order through the mail service, a promise had been set between his own people and someone connected to the woman. The agreement was binding and sacred, not written for trade or ownership, but connected to protection and survival. The rancher felt his confusion deepen. He wondered if this meant he had unknowingly stepped into a cultural bond, something he did not mean to disturb. The Apache man then asked him to listen with patience, for stories were like rivers and could not be understood if someone only looked at the surface. The rancher nodded, though worry still beat heavy in his chest. The The Apache man began explaining that before he reached adulthood, his tribe faced danger from all directions. Many were forced to leave, hide, or defend themselves without rest. They formed alliances in ways that outsiders rarely understood. One such alliance involved a family who lived in a border town struggling to survive harsh winters and unjust treatment. A child from that family was protected by his people and raised safely for a season. And in return, the family promised a future bond of goodwill. Years later, when the mail-order bride offer was written by the woman, she did not know about that past agreement. But the elders did. The rancher rubbed his hands together, trying to keep his thoughts steady. He realized he did not know anything about the deeper roots connecting strangers across land. He had lived most of his life with cattle, horses, and small-town talk, never considering that his search for companionship might cross paths with a story older than his homestead. The Apache man shared that the woman discovered the truth after she wrote the letter and photo, and she believed it was better to honor what was promised long ago instead of breaking it. The rancher felt disappointment burn in his chest, though he did his best to hide it. He had spent months preparing his home, dreaming of conversation, warmth, shared work, shared meals, and a soft voice that could read life into the silence of his nights. The Apache man assured him she was safe and not harmed. She was not forced to stay or threatened. She chose what she believed would be right, even if it meant letting go of hope she once carried. The rancher tried to breathe through the ache building in him. He asked what the leather-carved object represented. The Apache visitor explained that it was a token of honor, proof of gratitude, and a sign that the promise was not forgotten. When passed to another, it held a meaning of shared responsibility, not ownership or debt. It meant that the rancher was now seen as one who intersected with their path. Whether he chose to accept or not, the rancher was not sure how he felt. He had waited for a bride but received something completely different, something he did not understand but could not dismiss. The Apache man could tell he struggled, so he offered to share more of his own past, hoping it would untangle the rancher's confusion. He spoke of how he grew up in land marked by trials, where strength did not come from fists, but from spirit and memory. He was tall because his ancestors were hunters that traveled long distances, built shelter in deep canyon shadows, wrestled storms with patience, and respected what the sky allowed and denied. The rancher found himself quietly respecting him, not because of his size, but because he carried himself with quiet steadiness. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin walls like something trying to come inside. The horses in the corral shifted and snorted. The night grew darker and colder, as if the land itself waited to hear what decision might be formed between two men from different worlds. The rancher stood and walked to the window, staring at the wide darkness. He wondered why life tested a man just when he felt closest to peace. He thought about all the lonely winters he had lived through while dreaming of a bride. Now, instead of soft footsteps and a gentle voice, he had a strong warrior who seemed to bring both burden and opportunity. He turned back and asked what the Apache man expected from him. The warrior answered that he did not come to demand or threaten. He came to offer a choice. If the rancher rejected the token, he would leave by dawn and carry the message back. But it would mark a broken bridge that might never be rebuilt. If he accepted it, then their paths would remain linked, allowing something new to form. The rancher asked why his acceptance mattered so much. The Apache man explained that it was not about taking someone's place, but about sealing peace between two sides that had spent too long separated by fear and misunderstanding. The rancher felt something shift inside him. He asked what would happen next if he accepted. The Apache guest paused before speaking, as if measuring truth against possibility. He said that he would remain until the rancher understood the meaning of the token, till he learned why it was given, and until trust was shaped through work, not just words. The rancher nearly stepped back. The thought of sharing his land and home with someone he barely understood scared him in ways he had never admitted even to himself. The room held a quiet that felt like a door with only one hinge left. The rancher could not bring himself to answer yet. He needed time, air, and thoughts that were not tangled. The Apache man understood and agreed not to pressure him. He simply asked for a place to sit near the fire while the rancher searched his own heart. The rancher nodded and stepped out onto the porch, where frost began to coat the ground and the moonlight stretched across the barren field. He clenched the porch railing, thinking about everything he wanted, everything he lost, and everything he did not know how to face. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, and the giant visitor sat as still as carved stone, waiting without impatience. The night held both men in separate silence, and though nothing was settled, a new chapter had already begun. Even if neither man could name it yet, the rancher stayed on the porch long enough for the cold to bite through his shirt and settle into his bones. The sky above the plains was wide and sharp with stars, and the land below felt empty in a way that matched his chest. He had wanted a mail-order bride to fill that emptiness, someone to bring warmth, laughter, and a softer kind of noise into the cabin. Instead, he had a giant Apache warrior inside, sitting at his fire, carrying a token he barely understood and a promise he had never agreed to make. He kept turning that truth over in his mind like a rough stone, hoping it might smooth out if he held it long enough. He heard the fire shift inside and the low sound of a log settling. His guest did not move around much, did not pace or pry. That only made the tension worse. The rancher was used to cattle making noise, 2 horses stamping, 2 men talking over their worries. This quiet, patient presence on his land felt somehow heavier than shouting. He wondered what the townsfolk would say if they saw an Apache warrior twice his size sitting at his table while the mail-ordered bride he paid for never arrived. The rancher thought about town, about the small wooden church, the dusty main street, the saloon with sticky floors, and the general store where word traveled faster than any stagecoach. People out here already watched him with mild curiosity. He lived alone, worked hard, kept his head down. They knew he had posted for a bride. Some had praised the idea, saying a woman might settle him, keep his ranch steady, help with the homestead. Others had smirked, saying they doubted any woman from back east would last long in the rough old West. If they found out that instead of a bride he got an Apache man at his doorstep, tongues would not just wag, they would whip. He stepped back inside, closing the door against the cold. The Apache warrior lifted his eyes, calm and steady. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another. 2 men standing on opposite banks of a river they were being asked to cross. The rancher moved to the table and sat down, his hands still restless. He finally asked the question that clawed at him most. Why him? Why his ranch? Why his name on those papers? Out of all the men in the territory, why tie this old promise to his doorstep? The Apache man nodded once, as if he had been waiting for that question. He said the woman had chosen the rancher, not only for herself, but because she saw something in the few words he had written in his letter. She had spoken of him back in the town where she stayed while decisions were made. She told the elders he sounded like a man who knew loneliness, but did not let it harden him. A man who spoke of his land with care instead of greed. A man who wanted a partner, not a servant. The elders, hearing this, believed he might be someone who could stand in a bridge between 2 ways of life. If he was given a chance, hearing that stung and warmed him all at once. He had written honestly, not trying to impress anyone. He had admitted he was not handsome, not rich, not charming. All he had was land, steady hands, and a heart that had grown tired of empty nights. To know she had read that and spoken kindly of him made the loss of her feel sharper. It also made the weight of this strange new situation even heavier. He asked what would happen to her now. The Apache man answered that she would remain in the border town for a time, helping a family tied to his people, perhaps later marrying there if her heart allowed. She was not abandoned. She was not punished. She simply turned down the trail that matched the old promise. The rancher stared at the carved token on the table. It held designs of mountains, flowing lines that might be rivers, and a symbol at the center that looked like 2 paths crossing. He traced one groove with his finger and asked what it meant in simple words. The Apache visitor said it was a sign of shared watch, a mark that one life agreed to look out for another, even when storms came. It could mean many things depending on how it was accepted. One man might become a guest, a partner in trade, a shield against trouble. or even family of a different kind. The word family sat between them like a spark. The rancher had wanted a family in a clear way. A bride, then children, a home filled with voices, the sound of a baby crying, maybe a boy learning to ride, a girl learning to bake. The simple noise of ordinary life. The idea of forming some kind of bond with a huge Apache man instead did not fit that picture in his head. Yet he could not ignore the truth that this man was flesh and bone, with his own history, his own wounds, his own hope. Not a symbol, not a threat, but a person. He asked what the warrior's name was. The Apache man gave it a name shaped by his own tongue, carrying meaning about storms and standing tall. The rancher repeated it slowly, careful not to turn it into something small or clumsy. The warrior watched him with a hint of approval. The rancher finally told him his own name, feeling strange that it took this long for such a simple thing. They were no longer only rancher and Apache, stranger and giant. They were two men who knew each other's names, which made everything harder to dismiss. Far off, coyotes called. The rancher lit another lantern and spoke of the land. He told how the ranch had once belonged to a man who drank too much and beat his horse when he lost at cards. The bank took the land. The rancher bought it with every coin he had saved from years of hard labor. He rebuilt the fences, mended the roof, dug the new well. He poured himself into the soil. In time, the land rewarded him with healthy cattle and decent crops. Yet for all its gifts, he had never learned to answer his voice in the dark. The Apache warrior listened carefully, like someone who knew that land carried stories of its own. He said his people once traveled near these parts during certain seasons, long before the fences, long before the ranch house, long before the telegraph poles lined the horizon. He knew the pattern of the hills, the way the wind curved around a certain rock formation, where water hid under dry ground. To him, this place was not empty wilderness. It was old memory. That meant their conflict was not only about one missing bride, it was about ownership and belonging. It's about two different ways of seeing the same stretch of dirt. Another layer of tension hung there. The rancher realized many in town spoke of the land as if it had only begun when the deeds were printed. The maps drawn, the lines marked. To the Apache, it had existed long before paper claimed it. Both men thought they were respecting what was theirs. That misunderstanding had fueled endless grief across the frontier. Now those big forces had walked into his living room and placed a carved token on his table. The rancher asked if the warrior had family waiting for him somewhere. The Apache man said he had a mother who still lived, his brothers who traveled with different bands, and a people always scattered and regrouping. He spoke of raids that were forced by hunger, of losses that came from broken promises, of soldiers who came to drive them away. He did not tell these things to demand pity, only to explain why keeping promises mattered so much. When you had little left, honor was one of the few things that could not be taken by force. As the night deepened, another thread of conflict began to tug into view. The rancher remembered that in a few days he would need to ride into town for supplies. He pictured the sheriff, who looked for trouble whenever an Apache came within sight of the church steeple. He pictured the shopkeepers, who pretended not to be afraid, but still told stories about raids whenever someone needed. Bringing the Apache warrior into town would be like dropping a torch into dry hay. Yet leaving him alone on the ranch while he rode in might bring its own trouble. If riders passing near his land spotted an Apache giant moving around his property, they might assume the ranch had been taken or raided and ride back to spread fear and lies. The rancher realized his choice about the token was not just personal. It could draw a line between him and the town he relied on for trade and news. If he accepted the bond, he might lose favor or protection there. Some may even call him a traitor to his own kind. If he rejected it, he might close the door on a chance to build something rare. A partnership across cultures that most men never dared to try. His mind spun so hard he barely noticed he was gripping the back of a chair, so tight his knuckles turned white. The Apache warrior broke the silence first. He said he understood the rancher's fear. In his own world, bringing a white rancher among his people would cause whispers too. He did not ask the rancher to pretend the danger was small. He only asked that he not decide based on the loudest outside voices, but on what he saw in front of him. In one man's eyes, that simple request cut through some of the fog. The rancher looked straight at him, meeting his gaze without flinching. There was strength there, yes, and the quiet readiness of a warrior. But there was also a steadiness that did not lean toward cruelty. He saw someone who had already carried heavy burdens, someone who would not leave easily once he gave his word. A man like that on a ranch could be a shield, a partner in hard work, a force that kept rustlers away. Yet it could also bring conflict to his doorstep like never before. The fire burned low. The rancher added another log, watching the sparks leap up and fade. He decided that before he chose anything, he needed to know more about the woman who set all of this in motion. He needed to understand what she gave up and why she believed he might be suited for a bridge like this. He asked the warrior if she had written anything for him. The Apache man reached into his leather wrap and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges but carefully kept. He said she had asked him to deliver it only if the rancher wanted to know more. It's not as a command, but as a gift. The rancher stared at the letter, feeling his heart thud harder. That paper might carry answers, comfort, or further confusion. It might open a door he could never close again. His fingers hovered near it, then pulled back. The warrior watched him without pushing, his expression unreadable but attentive. The rancher knew that the choice to read that letter, or leave it sealed, would shape everything that came next on this lonely piece of frontier land. The rancher stared at the folded letter as if it were a burning coal. Knowing that one touch could change the direction of everything, he sat there with his hand close but not yet brave enough to pick it up. The Apache warrior watched him without impatience, as though he understood that sometimes a man needed silence more than words. The flames in the stove flickered against the walls, sending warm shadows dancing across the room, but even that gentle comfort could not settle the storm in the rancher's mind. After what felt like a long struggle inside his chest, he slowly reached for the letter, holding it carefully as if it could tear just by breathing on it. He unfolded the paper and saw the familiar writing style. The same hand that wrote him months earlier, when they first exchanged small notes about hopes, dreams, and life far away from noisy towns. She wrote that she was sorry, yet she could not turn away from the truth she learned after sending the first letter. She explained how she discovered the bond her family once made with the Apache people. A bond that saved lives when times were cruel and storms wiped out entire homes. She wrote that breaking such a promise might bring harm, fear, or misfortune to others. And although she cared for the rancher's honest words, she prayed he would find kindness in his heart to accept what stood before him instead of what he expected. She ended her message by saying she believed he was strong, not by muscle, but by spirit. When the rancher finished reading, he set the letter down with steady hands, although inside he felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He did not speak at first. The Apache warrior waited, his posture steady like a mountain tree facing strong wind. The rancher cleared his throat and finally asked what the warrior wished to build between them, if not trade or force. The Apache man said he wished to find peace, shared purpose, and a path where neither side lived with suspicion. He did not want to take the ranch, nor control it. He asked only for a chance to prove that the token was not a burden, but a doorway. The rancher stepped away, pacing near the window, staring outside toward the moonlit pasture where the cattle rested. He wondered what kind of future he could shape with a man like the warrior. Could they work the land together? Watch each other's back? Defend the ranch against thieves or hungry wolves? Build something that others might one day understand instead of fear? The idea sounded impossible to most people. Yet the rancher's heart felt pulled toward something bigger than his original plan. Still, he feared what would happen if the town learned the truth. He feared becoming a target, losing trade, or watching trouble follow them both. Morning arrived slowly, with a cold gray light. The rancher barely slept. When he walked outside, the Apache warrior was already awake, sitting near the corral, checking the condition of the fence posts. His skilled eyes caught things the rancher never noticed, spotting small points where weather or coyotes had weakened the wood. He pointed them out calmly, not criticizing, but offering help. Together, they repaired the fence, working side by side without many words, but with slow-growing trust. The rancher noticed how strong and careful his guest was. Despite his great size, he handled the wood with gentle precision instead of brute force. During the day, they worked on small chores around the ranch. The Apache warrior showed how to check tracks around the property, reading the ground like others read newspapers. He pointed out where a deer had passed, where a fox crossed, where an unknown rider once paused under a tree. The rancher found himself impressed and curious, learning skills he never imagined he could. In return, the rancher taught him how to work the well pump, how to store feed in the barn, how to handle the cattle without pushing them into panic. Slowly, they began to speak of their different worlds, each trying to understand instead of defend. But peace never settled for long on the frontier. On the second day, the rancher saw the dust cloud of 3 riders headed toward the property. He recognized 2 from town, men whose mouths carried gossip faster than wind could carry dust. The rancher felt his heart thud hard. He knew trouble rode quicker than help. He told the Apache warrior to stay inside the barn while he met the riders at the gate. The riders asked if he heard any strange activity on his land, claiming they spotted a large figure near the edge of the hills and were checking if any trouble was near. Their eyes searched the ranch suspiciously. It's like hawks scanning a field for movement. The rancher kept his voice as steady as he could. He said he saw nothing unusual. The riders asked if his bride had arrived. He replied that there had been a delay and she might not come. The men smirked, exchanging looks that held mockery. They guessed aloud that maybe she learned something about him before coming and changed her mind. The rancher forced himself to stay calm and not react. Before leaving, the riders warned that if any Apache were seen nearby, they would call for a hunt. The rancher felt his stomach twist, knowing how fast fear could turn into violence. When the riders disappeared, the Apache warrior stepped out from the barn shadows, his face holding emotion the rancher had not seen before, not fear, but sadness mixed with caution. He said he knew this was the danger of crossing worlds. The rancher apologized, saying he wished there was a way to protect what they were building without facing every storm alone. The warrior said storms tested the ground, revealing where it cracked and where it held strong. The rancher did not fully understand, but he knew the words carried weight over the next days. They continued working together, but both men felt the clock ticking. The rancher still needed to go to town for supplies soon. Delaying too long would raise suspicions. He feared returning alone and leaving the warrior vulnerable, yet feared bringing him and risking worse trouble. One evening, near sundown, they sat outside with warm mugs, watching the sky turn gold. The rancher asked what the warrior planned if town turned against them. The warrior replied that he did not come to run or fight, but to stay until the truth showed whether they could stand as allies. That answer did not erase danger, but it did strengthen the rancher's resolve. On the 4th day, they made a plan. The rancher would ride into town alone but leave signs that he had company, showing the ranch was protected. The Apache warrior would remain hidden near the edge of the property, watching the land from high ground. If trouble arrived, they agreed on a signal using smoke patterns. The rancher packed a saddlebag, feeling the tension pressing harder than any physical weight. Before leaving, he turned to the warrior and said that he had never trusted someone so fast, even when it made no sense. The warrior placed a hand on his shoulder, not as dominance, but as shared courage. The rancher rode into town with a stern face, hoping no one would read the worry in his eyes. At the general store, people gathered around him with questions. Some asked about his bride, others hinted that they heard Apache tracks near his land. He tried to keep his words simple, not revealing too much, but his calm tone seemed to stir even more curiosity. The store owner leaned in and asked if he had seen anything strange. The rancher replied that he had everything under control and that his ranch was safer than ever. Those words, instead of calming them, made them suspicious. As he started to leave, the sheriff walked inside. He asked the rancher to stay a moment and step aside. The sheriff looked him in the eye and said there were whispers that an Apache man had been seen near his property. He demanded the truth. The rancher's hands tightened around his gloves. His heart beat loud in his throat. He said no hunter, thief, or stranger threatened his ranch, and that he knew how to protect what was his. The sheriff stared a long time, then warned that if anything dangerous happened, he would come with armed riders. On the ride home, The rancher felt each hoofbeat drum like a countdown. When he reached his land, he saw a faint smoke signal drifting up from the rocky hill behind the corral. It was the pattern they had discussed, the one that meant someone had approached the ranch while he was away. He kicked the horse faster, fear rushing through him like ice. When he reached the barn, he saw footprints near the door, too many to be only his. He rushed inside, calling out. The warrior stepped from behind a beam, unharmed but tense. He said riders had come while the rancher was gone, circling the property from a distance. They did not approach close enough to speak, but they watched and then rode off toward the river trail. The rancher felt danger growing like a storm cloud. He knew it would not be long before the riders returned, likely not with questions, but with rifles. That night, they sat inside with the lantern low, planning how to face what might come. No matter how they looked at it, a moment of choice was approaching fast. A moment that would decide whether they would stand together or break apart. The rancher looked at the token again, running his thumb across the carved lines, feeling the weight of what it meant. The warrior watched him quietly, knowing the rancher was close to making a life-shaping decision. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, as if the land itself knew that the most dangerous and defining part of their story was only a breath away from unfolding. The rancher could hardly sleep that night. Lying awake and staring at the ceiling, as the wind moved across the roof shingles and the coyotes called from far-off hills, he knew something had shifted between him and the Apache warrior, something that fear alone could not break. The world outside saw them as strangers from two different sides, but here under the same roof they no longer felt like opposites. They were two men shaped by hardship, hope, and long silent nights, where dreams felt almost out of reach. The rancher finally sat up, grabbed the token again, and held it under the lantern light. Those carved marks no longer felt like a puzzle. They felt like a path he was meant to take, a path he did not choose, but was given. And somehow it fit the life he always wanted, without him knowing it. He walked to the table where the Apache warrior sat, sharpening a tool. Working with quiet care as if sharpening thoughts along with steel, the rancher placed the token between them and breathed steady. He said he did not know how the future would work, or how others might react, or whether storms ahead would be heavier than what they already faced. But he also said that loneliness was a kind of slow death, and that running away from a bond, built on honor, would haunt him longer than any mistake. He finally spoke the words he had been circling for days. He accepted the token and the connection behind it, not as a replacement for the bride he never met, but as a new kind of start. A start built on trust between two different worlds and two different men. The Apache warrior's eyes softened, though his expression stayed calm. He placed his large hand over the token and nodded with quiet respect, not celebrating or speaking empty words. He simply promised that he would stand with the rancher and honor the land as if it were his own. The rancher felt peace settle inside him like warm blankets after a long freeze. For the first time since the letter arrived, he felt he had chosen something with purpose instead of fear. They talked late into the night, agreeing that they would show truth through actions, not shouting or forcing others to believe. When dawn came, they stepped outside like partners ready to build something stronger than rumors. Their first task was preparing the ranch, with more signs of shared strength. They repaired fences, stacked wood, and checked water sources. The Apache warrior showed how to track weather signs and animal patterns, while the rancher taught him how to operate ranch equipment with steady rhythm. Their teamwork brought a different energy to the land. The cattle behaved calmer, as if sensing two protectors instead of one. The land felt richer, yet still raw, with the scent of open earth and freedom. Days passed before the next test arrived. The same riders from town returned, but this time with the sheriff. They stopped at the gate and called for the rancher. He walked out calmly while the Apache warrior stayed visible at his side. The men stared with open shock. The sheriff demanded to know why the warrior was here and if he was being forced or forcing someone else. The rancher stepped between them and spoke clear. He said the warrior was there by agreement, by honor, and by choice. He said there was no threat, no harm, and no trespassing. He explained that there was an old promise tied to his mail-order bride, and that the token represented peace, not trouble. The riders looked at each other, unsure how to respond. They had expected fear or panic, not steady confidence and shared unity. The sheriff asked the Apache man directly if he intended harm. The warrior simply said he protected what he respected, and that he respected the land he stood on. There was no anger, no challenge, and no threat in his tone. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then looked at the rancher and said he would not interfere as long as peace remained. He warned that if trouble ever rose, they must ride to town and report it, not handle things alone. The rancher agreed and thanked him. The riders turned and left, glancing back but no longer with suspicion, more with confusion and curiosity, as they rode off. The rancher let out a slow breath he had been holding. The Apache warrior did not smile, but his eyes said enough. Something had shifted beyond the ranch fence. The threat of violence did not vanish forever, but it stepped back enough for hope to settle. After that encounter, the ranch began to change in ways the rancher never predicted. Word spread slowly that he had someone strong working with him, watching his land, riding with him during tough tasks. Some whispered wild stories, but others grew curious and even supportive, especially those tired of constant fear among neighbors. Weeks passed and quiet proof replaced doubt. The ranch became more organized, crops stored safely, predators kept at distance, and the barn reinforced stronger than ever. The rancher and the Apache warrior built trust not with speeches, but with daily actions. They shared meals cooked by both of them, and sometimes they sat outside near the fire telling stories about their lives. The rancher talked about his childhood, long winters, and how he learned ranching from old cattle hands who never gave up, even when storms knocked down half the fences. The warrior spoke of his childhood near river valleys, how he learned to track animals, how his people moved with the seasons, how stories were taught through memory rather than ink. The rancher no longer saw him as a giant arriving in place of a bride. He saw him as a brother forged through circumstance and choice. They did not belong to the same bloodline, yet they shared something deeper, a bond chosen, not forced. That was the strongest kind of alliance. One spring afternoon, while checking the south pasture, the rancher found himself no longer thinking about what others thought, but instead about how far they had come. His land was no longer silent. His nights were no longer empty. His meals no longer lonely. His dreams no longer closed behind fear. As months moved forward, something beautiful began to grow from their shared effort. A small group of peaceful families from both cultures visited the ranch, bringing goods and helping hands. Children from town played near the river, while elders from the Apache side shared herbal knowledge and wilderness skills. The ranch slowly turned into a shared space of learning instead of suspicion. It was never perfect, never free of challenges, but it was real and rooted in goodwill instead of fear. One day, when the rancher opened the drawer where he kept important items, he found the original folded letter again. He read it not with hurt, but with gratitude. He whispered a wish for the woman who changed his life without even stepping on his land. He hoped she found a life where she felt proud of her choice. He tucked the letter back with care, no longer feeling loss, but appreciation for the road it opened. The Apache warrior. Now a true partner on the ranch carved a new symbol into a wooden post near the gate. It held two paths crossing, but beneath it, he carved another small line to show they continued forward together, not apart. Travelers passing through noticed it and asked about its meaning. The rancher smiled and said it represented the most important truth he ever learned. A strong home is not built only with wood, nails, and land, but with trust, honor, and shared purpose. Their story spread slowly across the frontier as an example of unlikely partnership, quiet bravery and real peace. Some laughed at it, some doubted it, but others whispered that maybe the world did not have to stay divided forever. The rancher and the Apache warrior never claimed to change the whole West, but they changed their piece of it, and that was enough. When the sun set behind the red hills and the sky turned to gold and purple, both men often stood side by side near the corral, watching the cattle settle and the wind pour across the grass like a blessing. The rancher no longer wished for a bride just to fill his loneliness. His life had taken a different turn, one that gave him respect, friendship, and a legacy worth holding. He found what he truly needed, not someone to replace his emptiness, but someone to help him turn it into strength. The land grew richer, the friendship deeper, and the ranch became a place of welcome, not worry. Their bond stood like a tall tree rooted in rocky soil, yet rising strong above storms. In a world full of fear, they had found courage. In a land full of division, they built unity. And in a story that began with confusion, they formed a happy ending built from honor, brotherhood, and the quiet power of two hearts that learned to trust.